Well, divers in Thailand are waiting to restart their high-risk mission to rescue the remaining 8 boys and their soccer coach from a flooded cave. 4 boys were brought out safely last night and are recovering in hospital. The others will have to wait as air tanks are replenished along the treacherous exit route. Reporter Anne Barker joins us now live from Chiang Rai. And what can you tell us about this second phase of the rescue mission? Are preparations now in place?
Catherine, when the authorities had a press conference here at 9 o'clock last night, which was about midnight Australian time, Australian Eastern time, they said that it would be 10 to 20 hours before phase 2 of this mission would begin. So that could have meant as early as 7 a.m. here or as late as about 5 p.m. Assuming that it went similar to yesterday, they set off, the 18 specialist divers set off into the cave around 10 yesterday morning, and the first boys came out around 5, 6 o'clock when it was still daylight. We actually did see a van full of divers go past around 8 o'clock this morning, which perhaps would be in line with that possible time frame. But of course it's impossible to know whether they are already in there, whether they're already with the boys and the boys are already swimming out, or whether it's still underway, still that preparatory phase where they're trying to replace those air tanks and other supplies inside the caves.
So, Anne, what further details do you have about yesterday's rescue mission, which brought 4 out?
Well, it went, by all accounts, it went like clockwork. They were hoping the first boys would come out at around 9 p.m. And in fact, they came out, the first boys, as early as 5:40, I think, which was 2.5 hours earlier. So everything seemed to go well. Some of the boys were able to walk out of the cave. They walked to to where they were taken to a helicopter, and then they were flown to the Chiang Rai hospital. One of those 4 is possibly in a worse state than the others. We have heard reports that one of them is in a bad way. We're not sure who that was. There was one report in the Bangkok Post that the coach, the 25-year-old coach, might have been among them, but other reports don't necessarily mention his name. And even so, it's not clear whether that condition or his state of health is related to the actual grueling 4-kilometre swim and dive through the cave network, or whether it goes back to the lack of food that they had in the 9 or 10 days before they were found last week.
Well, speaking to that grueling cave network, we're hearing so much about how narrow these tunnels are, how murky and cold the waters are. What is being considered to be the greatest challenges for this exit route? Is it the sumps? Is it the learning to dive?
Well, look, I think it's a combination of all the conditions, including the water levels, because the sheer volume of water is a factor here. As it rises, the current inside those caves also increases. There's apparently still quite a strong current in the water that the boys have to deal with. Whether it's against them or going with them, it can be quite hazardous. Certainly the boys had to learn how to scuba dive. The understanding is that they were wearing full face masks that allow them to breathe both through the nose and the mouth, which is far easier than standard diving gear where you might only breathe through the mouth. It's understood that there was one diver who actually held each boy sort of underneath him, and even the tank, I think, was shared with another diver, so the boys didn't have to carry their own tanks, as far as I know. And the other diver, there were 2 divers for each boy. The other diver was either alongside, if the space permitted, or in fact slightly above. Now, or slightly in front, I should say. And when they got to these particularly tricky bits where there was a hole in one place as small as 38 centimetres wide at the narrowest, presumably one diver would have gone through to help pull the boy through, and the other diver would have helped push through from behind. And of course, the oxygen mask or the air mask hopefully would have stayed on, so they wouldn't have had to remove that, but the tank would have come through later. That's my understanding of how it would have occurred. And then they would have had positions along the route where they would have been able to come up to dry land and perhaps breathe fresh air for a while, perhaps even have some food and a break before they continue again. That's why it took, fully 8 to 10 hours for these boys to make the 4-kilometre journey, because the first 1.5 or 1.7 kilometres was the most harrowing. And once they got past that point, they were able to walk most of the rest of the route.
Such extraordinary courage, which I'm sure we'll hear more of as these hours and days unfold. The weather, Anne, has of course played a huge part in determining the timeline for this rescue. What is the current condition where you are now at the cave and in the tunnel, and the forecast?
Well, it's very localised rain here. It's very typical of the tropics where, you know, you can have torrential rain here and just 100 metres up the road there's nothing. So we're now a few kilometres away from the cave site, but assuming it's all very similar, you get these sporadic bursts of rain where you can have a torrential downpour that doesn't necessarily last that long, maybe half an hour, and then there's periods where you've got very steady rain. Right now where we are, it's not raining at all, but it has been raining sort of lightly this morning. When you look at the forecast, it looks as if, again, typical in the tropics, you get heavier rain often in the afternoon and the evening. And I would expect, similar to yesterday, that will be the case today, where perhaps later in the day the rainfall starts to increase.
OK, Anne Barker, many thanks for the update.